Hello, everybody. This is Zach at it again. I'm your host, Zach Cooley, and I am honored to be here with the man I consider to be my writing hero. When I became a writer, this is the guy I wanted to write like, and I'm talking about a longtime Whitfield bureau chief of the Roanoke Times, Mr. Paul Dellinger, and we are here to commemorate his 60th anniversary of becoming a reporter at the Roanoke Times. Thank you, my friend, for talking with me today. It's an honor to do this. And as I said, we are celebrating, or I'm wanting to honor in some way, 60 years of your becoming a newspaper reporter. Now, as we know, being a journalist now is nothing like it was in 1963. In fact, when you started being a journalist is when I think the peak time was to be a journalist. And that is mainly because of the Kennedy assassination in November of 63. And I say that because if you were the first one to get that story published in the Dallas Morning News, you were very likely to win a Pulitzer Prize or something like that. So when you began reporting, did you have to do any coverage of the Kennedy assassination as a local reporter, or were you more concentrated on local issues?
Not really. I remember when I first heard about that, I was driving down in Bristol trying to get an interview with the man who had been named the new Civil Defense Coordinator for Southwest Virginia. And I never did catch up with him. I got into his office and his secretary said, "Did you hear that the president has been shot?" And my first thought was, "President of what country? Somewhere in South America? When did this happen?" And then, of course, I found out what really happened.
Right.
But I wasn't involved in any of the direct coverage of it,
And was your job always the Whitfield bureau chief or New River Valley chief, or what were your titles with Roanoke?
Well, I started out, actually, I've been demoted right down through my career. I started out as the bureau chief here. The bureau was only two people at the time. Hazel Bowen, who was here at the time, was a veteran of the bureau. She'd been here for many years through two or three so-called bureau chiefs. And then eventually she moved on. She was very good at working stories on the phone.
Yeah, well, I've had to do plenty of those with my mobility issues over the years.
Right.
In fact, that's how I conduct most of them.
Yeah. But, if you go to the Wythe County Animal Clinic, the one on the Grayson County Road, there's a framed picture up there of an article she did when the two husband and wife veterinarians first set up shopping with their picture and everything.
Wow, is that right?
She's still there all these years later.
Wow, that's very interesting. So you started out. You said you started out as the bureau chief in Whitfield.
Yeah, and then in 1989 they kind of did away with the bureau, and I became a senior writer, as they called it, attached to the New River Valley Bureau in Christiansburg, and had various assignments up there. Sometimes it was Pulaski County, sometimes it was Radford, different things and different areas of expertise. Then eventually I just became a general reporter. So instead of being promoted, I've been coming down all these years.
Right. Well, I know that when you retired in 2006, I said, I can remember being very young, 9 or 10 years old. And if I didn't know you then, but I knew that if Paul Dellinger came to write a story here in Whitfield, that we were going to be in the Roanoke Times, and that was a big deal for us. I remember specifically when the monument, the Stephen F. Austin Monument, was dedicated in 1997. And Austinville made the front page of the Roanoke Times. I thought that was really big stuff at that time. And I wanted, when you retired in 2006, that was my dream job. I said, that is what I would love to do. And of course, they did not replace you. There was no Whitfield Bureau at that time because
it had gone away by then.
So, but just the way you wrote and the style that you wrote in before I even knew you, I said, when Paul Dellinger comes here to do a story, people think it's a big deal, and when I want to get to a point where when I write a story, I want people to think it's a big deal because I'm coming to do the story. That is what I aspired to be, the same as you were. And then to get to know you right about at that time, and we have become very good friends over the years. I'm blessed to have known you and called you a friend. I have availed upon your services more times than I can count to edit books and plays and just everything in the world that I've come across. And you've always made time for me and always been kind and most helpful. And I seek your advice before I seek anyone else's.
Well, you haven't needed myself. How many years have you been doing the column now?
Yeah, this past July was 18.
Gosh, yeah. Think about that. That's quite an accomplishment.
Yeah, Yeah, well, if I make it till next September, I've got about another year to go. If I make it till September of 2024, I will have reached 1,000 consecutive columns.
Wow. Gosh, that's a record of sorts. It's enviable.
Well, I'm very excited to hopefully reach that milestone. But can I ask you, I guess we're going to back up here. What inspired you to want to be a reporter? I know at that point you had already published some short stories and science fiction, and I've covered your work as an author pretty extensively, but we haven't talked much about your work as a reporter. What inspired you to want to be a reporter and work with the Roanoke Times?
Probably a number of things. For one thing, I had an uncle who was a reporter on the Richmond Times-Dispatch. He unfortunately died at a very young age. He was only in his 40s, had an accident. But he was someone I admired a lot. That probably was part of what got me interested. And, of course, there were the old movies back in the 50s about crusading reporters, this and that. Even the Green Hornet was a newspaper publisher in his alter ego life. And I worked on our high school newspaper, and I had a crackerjack teacher in journalism. We had a journalism class in high school, and a lady named Margaret Grable taught that and really taught all the basics you would need to in college or anywhere else to get a grounding in journalism. Then when I went to college, actually not till my senior year, I started being involved in the college newspaper. And we had an advisor who worked at the Roanoke newspaper who came and made us try to make us more professional. After that, I went into the service, and I ended up working on the West Point newspaper, which was a weekly newspaper. And so became editor of that. That
is very prestigious to say you've done the West Point paper. Now, where did you?
I also did KP and all the other little things you think about that they aren't.
Right. Right. Where did you attend college and work on the paper?
Roanoke College.
Okay.
Just up the road.
Right.
And then when I was getting out of the Army, I wrote to the man who had been our advisor on the college paper and asked him if he thought there were any openings on the Roanoke paper. I was looking for a job. He said he wrote back and said, this is who you write to, the personnel director. You can get an application, which I did. And then when I got out of the Army, they interviewed me, and I ended up with the job at the Bureau down here in Wytheville.
Had you had any plans to move to Wytheville at that point in time, or was it just the job that brought you here?
Oh, it was the job. I had never, well, I was about to say I had never heard of Wytheville, but that's not true. There was somebody at Roanoke College with me who had lived in Wytheville, so I had heard of it. But no, I hadn't planned to move here. It was the job.
Well, you must have been very fond of it to have stayed with it for 44 years. To what do you attribute your longevity with the job? Was it just the joy of reporting? Did you specifically like this community?
I did and do like this community, yeah. The reporting was all over the place. Originally, the Bureau job was 15 counties from Giles, Pulaski, and Carroll on west. 15 counties and 3 cities. And I can't remember how many towns. And I would try to cover as many of boards of supervisors, town council, school boards, all that. So that was pretty hectic. And then in the late 1980s, they more or less phased out the Bureau and attached me to the Christiansburg office. So then I was reporting mostly in the New River Valley. I still did a little reporting down this way since I lived here and could keep up with things. And eventually they closed the Bureau altogether. So I was in Christiansburg all the time, not much down here.
So how did the Wytheville Bureau, or am I mistaken in trying to pay attention to what you've told me? How did the Wytheville Bureau involve 15 counties?
Well, it was kind of, I guess, because it was pretty much of a transportation jump-off place to get to all these places conveniently, and still being within driving distance of Roanoke if I needed to send film or something for a newspaper article. We were all connected. There were several other bureaus then. There was one in Lexington, one in Salem, and we were all connected by a teletype machine. Every time somebody would be typing a story on the teletype machine, we'd hear it down here at the Wytheville office. And whenever we typed one, they would get it at their office.
Which the office was on First Street, where the WIVE radio station used to be, correct?
Mm-hmm. That's right. The radio station was on the 2nd floor, and there were several offices, including the Forest Service at one point, Jefferson National Forest. And then that gave way to Gene Harrison's typewriter and machine shop. And on the other side, downstairs, was Lanny Lindemood's hair salon. And then back in the back was our little cubby hole, Hazel's and mine.
So how many years did you work with Hazel?
Until she retired. I'm not sure how many years ago. It was, gosh, it's probably 10, maybe 15, maybe more. I can't remember exactly what year it was she left.
So when Hazel retired, it was just you then?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Like I say, I kept getting demoted instead of promoted.
Right. And
I was bureau chief of myself.
Right. Bureau chief of Paul Dellinger Incorporated.
Yeah.
Well, I would be very honored to be in that company, quite frankly. In the stories that you covered in the last 60 years, which ones were the most prolific, and which ones meant the most to you personally?
That's a good question. They all seem to run together. I can't think of anything that stands out. I guess the coal mining strike in Southwest Virginia, which went on for months, that was a pretty big deal at the time.
Okay, and when was this?
1989, I think, it was the Pittston Coal Company that had gone on strike, sort of like you see the United Auto Workers today.
Right.
Except there were all kinds of incidents down there. The strikers and the people who were working for the company would confront each other outside the mine just about every day.
Mm-hmm.
There would be mass arrests of people who sat down in front of the mine to block the trucks from coming in and out. It was quite a thing.
Right. Okay.
There was another story down in Washington County. It was kind of fun. Sidney Sheldon, the author,
right,
had written a book called Bloodline, and at that time there was a trial going on about whether to distribute Playboy magazine and similar types of magazines in Washington County. And a minister was sitting in on that trial, and one of the defenses was, well, in the public library you have books that are no different than things you see depicted in these magazines. And he cited Sidney Sheldon's book.
Right.
The minister got right up, went over to the library, picked up the book, and started to walk out with it. He was apparently going to dispose of it. Mm-hmm. The librarian said, "Hey, wait, no, you can't do that. Are you checking it out?" "No, I'm throwing it away." "Well, you can't." And this controversy actually made 60 Minutes and Good Morning America.
Wow, I'll have to look that up.
Yeah, it was funny. The minister xeroxed some of the more racy passages in the book and distributed those to his congregation. And
oh, wow.
After all of it had died down, I went back to the library just out of curiosity to see if they still had the book. And they did. And it was just hanging together by threads. So many people had checked this out.
I'm sure. I believe that 100%.
Then we had a similar thing over in Carroll County. There was a book called The Floatplane Notebooks that some people objected to. And they had a similar kind of controversy. Today, you're seeing all these library books and school books being objected to. It's kind of a mass thing today. Back then, it was one county or the other county. It wasn't a whole mass movement like it is today.
That is very interesting. Did you have an opportunity during your 44-year career to interview anyone famous, any celebrities of sorts?
I interviewed some that were famous to me. Okay. As you know, Craig Allison, the late Craig Allison, and I were big fans of Western movies. Mm-hmm. And we found out that there were conventions being held in Tennessee and North Carolina, not too far away, where some of the old retired stars of these movies would come and be guests. We started going to maybe a day of those each year. And I got to interview people like Lash LaRue, Rex Allen, those kinds of people. So to me, that was probably the most fun I had. I don't know how many readers enjoyed the results of it, but I enjoyed writing about it.
Yeah, that would have been exciting for me as well. I believe you met Betty Lynn at one of those. My friend Betty Lynn from the Andy Griffith Show. Did you not?
Yes, she was at one of those. Uh-huh.
And I've had the privilege of interviewing her several times, and the interviewing those Mayberry stars, like it was when you went to the Western movie conventions. It was the same way for me when I went to Mayberry Days, and
yeah,
all of those people that worked on that show. That was the Desilu lot. So not only did they work on Andy Griffith, a lot of them were on Golden Girls, and a lot of them were on I Love Lucy, and knew Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz. And to me, if you knew Lucy, you knew the top person in television history.
Absolutely.
I don't
know how many people know it, but Lucy was instrumental in keeping Star Trek on the air for the first incarnation of it.
Absolutely. And Desi Arnaz wanted to play Elliot Ness originally in The Untouchables.
Oh my gosh, that would have been interesting casting.
He wanted
I didn't know that.
Yeah, he wanted to do it, but he knew that the public wouldn't buy that because he was already cemented as Ricky Ricardo. So they went with Robert Stack instead, and who became legendary for that. And the legendary also for Unsolved Mysteries, which also has a connection to you. You became you became news yourself when Danny Gordon published the Don't Look Up book of the alleged UFO sightings in Whitville, and rather put Whitville on the map in a sort of strange way.
Yeah, I think maybe some people would be just as happy if it hadn't been put on the map in that way.
That was the essence of what my dad said when he was quoted in a statewide newspaper. He said, "I would just as soon something else put us on the map, because when you're dealing with this subject, it kind of brings the weirdos out, and I'd just as soon not deal with the weirdos."
It did that. In fact, that's what the book was mostly about.
Right. And you did work with my dad some as chief deputy in Witt County and chief in Pulaski and Benton.
Mm-hmm. Well, I didn't work with him in Benton. That was off my range. But I certainly worked with him in Pulaski when he was chief up there, and that was after I was sort of out of the bureau and working out of Christiansburg.
Right.
Yeah, I enjoyed working with him a lot.
And he feels the same way. And I was going to ask you, and you may have already answered this when you were speaking of your uncle, but can you tell me who, like I said that I aspired to write the way that you did and look up to you as sort of a hero. Who were your heroes, be they local or internationally known writers? What did you aspire to write like any particular person? Did you have writing heroes? How did that go for you?
I can't think of any particular writing heroes except for the usual, like, say, Edward R. Murrow or somebody like that.
Yes.
There were some people that I read at Roanoke College on the Roanoke papers that I enjoyed, columnists like Ben Beagle, those folks. So if I could ever measure up to any of those, I would have been happy.
And Ben Beagle did a column for the Roanoke Times for many years. And I think he was known for his humor, was he not?
Absolutely, yeah.
And of course, your dear friend and mine, but also another personal hero of mine is the late great Craig Allison. I don't think anybody that's ever went through journalism or radio or anything hasn't looked up to Craig in some way.
Yeah, Craig did news on the radio for many years in addition to other duties that he did there.
Mm-hmm.
He was a man of many talents, many voices too, as you know.
Mm-hmm. And he was for sure the voice of Witt County. Nobody will ever replace him as such.
Yeah. I agree. But he also did voices other than his own, like Granny Fry and the Old Timer and various characters on the radio show The Adventures of Haphazard.
Mm-hmm.
So he was very talented.
Yeah, but you and he wrote together, did you not?
We did, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We perpetrated that.
Yeah, that must have been fun.
It was, yeah. Kind of like the old movie serials.
Mm-hmm. Well, I remember my friend, and I quote her all the time, but my friend Darlene Mabry, who was usually my cohort in my local Lucy fan club activities, she used to say when Craig Allison and Paul Dellinger had that radio station, it was a real radio station. And she mentioned people like Jack Fleming and Ed Zuber and all of these people that are unfortunately no longer with us. But
yeah,
you know,
I couldn't agree more. I didn't really have anything to do with the radio station except that I was downstairs and Craig and I talked on a daily basis about things we were both interested in. Craig and Ed Zuber and Jack Fleming all made that a very special kind of a radio station.
Certainly. And another thing that you and Craig had in common, you all brought back the old B westerns and the serial comics to the Whitfield Community College. And
yes, that was Craig's idea to have that once a month down there. There had been a series of showings at the Whitfield Community Center here in town. That a man named Mac Houston, he was a Methodist minister. He was kind of the one who turned Craig and me on to knowing that these Western film conventions existed, and there were publications that actually wrote about the old movies and things. So he was kind of the Johnny Appleseed who got all that started. But then when he left, and the college offered a chance for us to do it down there, Craig jumped at that and set it up, and he brought in all the sound equipment and everything else that we used.
And I only made it to one of those. Emily and I only made it to one of those. But it was one shortly before the pandemic and shortly before Craig passed away suddenly. And I'm very fortunate that the one afternoon that Emily and I were there, I was photographed with you and Craig, and that's the only.
That's right.
That's the only photograph I have with the two of you. So I treasure that very much.
So somebody who was a big fan of the B westerns once wrote that for those who don't understand the attraction, no explanation is possible. But for those who do, no explanation is necessary.
Absolutely. And of course, what you were doing there ceased with the pandemic, and I think just because nobody could ever match Craig, I think you just decided to just stop it altogether.
Yeah, there weren't that many coming by then. Well, there were right before the pandemic, but some of them actually had died during the pandemic, mostly of other causes, but there just weren't that many to make it viable after that.
Yeah, and your love for Western certainly inspired your writing. As a science fiction writer, you really put me in mind of Rod Serling and that.
Oh my goodness!
And that sort of writing, Twilight Zone serial kind of thing.
Yeah.
You done a wonderful. My favorite that you've done is the gunfight at Gower Gulch.
Oh yeah, I always have to explain that Gower Gulch is a place in Hollywood, not out west.
Right.
Where the cowboys came to try and get work in the movies when their jobs ran out.
And Desilu Studios that we're talking about, which became Paramount Pictures, is on the corner of Sunset and Gower.
Right. That was what they called Gower Gulch.
in Hollywood. Yeah. So, is there anything that I have not covered in terms of your reportorial career that you want to mention?
Gosh, I don't think so. I can't think of any huge stories that I've written, like Watergate or something like that. I've just sort of tried to I tried to make the newspaper a paper of record for all that went on in the counties that just involved people in general. They didn't have to be famous.
Do you notice, other than myself, I mean, obviously you're very well, you do reporting now and the press releases and things for the Wythe County Public Library and things of that nature. And you're obviously so well respected and highly thought of by the library administration and staff. are you aware of, do you feel respected by people in terms of your career, other than the things I say over and over?
I don't know. A newspaper is something that you read one day and then it's gone. So I'm not sure too many people will actually remember much about what I've written in the past. It's sort of ancient history now.
Well, I certainly feel that you are admired around this community. I thank you so much for talking to me today.
You too.
All right. Bye-bye.